Inversion is a cognitive strategy in which a problem is approached by considering its opposite or by asking what could go wrong instead of focusing only on what could go right, rather than asking, how do I succeed? Inversion reframes the question as, how might I fail and how can I prevent those failures? Psychologically, this method reduces blind spots, mitigates biases, and improves decision quality. The technique is rooted in counterfactual thinking, the mental simulation of alternative outcomes. Research in cognitive psychology shows that engaging with negative scenarios enhances foresight, risk awareness, and error prevention. By mentally rehearsing undesired results, the brain becomes more capable of anticipating obstacles and building resilient strategies. For example, in investment decision-making, a first-order question might be, what company will generate strong returns? Inversion reframes it as, which companies are most likely to fail and why? How can I avoid them? Similarly, in personal productivity, rather than asking, how can I become more effective? Inverted approach is, what habits waste my time and drain my focus, and how can I eliminate them? This shift leads to more sustainable outcomes. Neurologically, inversion engages the anterior cingulate cortex, a brain region associated with error detection and conflict monitoring. It also strengthens activation in the prefrontal cortex, which supports strategic planning and long-term thinking. By practicing inversion, individuals train their brains to anticipate negative contingencies, reducing impulsivity and enhancing adaptability to overestimate positive outcomes. It introduces a structured form of defensive pessimism, which has been shown to improve performance in uncertain contexts. People who systematically apply inversion are better at stress management because they perceive potential setbacks not as surprises, but as anticipated scenarios with prepared responses. As you reflect on this, you can mentally apply inversion to your own context. Instead of asking only, what should I do to achieve my goal? Ask, what could prevent me from achieving it? What mistakes would undermine progress? By rehearsing and neutralizing these risks, your decision-making becomes more grounded and less fragile. This deliberate mental practice reduces cognitive noise, sharpens clarity, and helps your brain shift into a calmer, more organized state, an ideal preparation for restorative sleep. Occam's razor is a principle of reasoning that suggests, when faced with multiple explanations for a phenomenon, the simplest explanation, the one with the fewest assumptions, is usually the most reliable. Psychologically, it is a cognitive heuristic that helps the brain conserve mental energy and avoid unnecessary complexity. At its core, Occam's razor does not claim that the simplest explanation is always correct, but that it is the best starting point. In science, this principle has guided discoveries for centuries. For example, when early astronomers studied planetary motion, complex models with epicycles explained orbits. But Newton's laws of gravitation offered a far simpler framework with greater explanatory power. Similarly, in medicine, when a patient presents symptoms, doctors are trained to first look for the most common cause before exploring rare diseases. When you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. Psychologically, this principle is tied to cognitive load. The human brain has limited working memory and tends to favor explanations that require to hold in mind. Neuroimaging studies show that when people are presented with simpler causal models, the prefrontal cortex and parietal regions process them more efficiently than when juggling complex, assumption-heavy scenarios. This efficiency reduces mental fatigue and increases decision accuracy. In decision-making, Occam's razor also acts as a defense against overfitting, whether in data science, strategic planning, or personal reasoning. Overly complex explanations often reflect the mind's tendency to detect patterns where none exist, influenced by confirmation bias or availability. Heuristics, By deliberately seeking simplicity, individuals reduce these biases and improve clarity. That said, applying Occam's razor requires caution. Simplicity should not mean oversimplification. A simple model is useful only if it explains the observed data adequately. In psychology, this balance is called parsimony, choosing the explanation that is as simple as possible, but not simpler than reality allows. As you reflect on this, consider how you process situations in your own life. Notice explanations filled with assumptions. Then, gently apply Occam's razor, strip away unnecessary details, identify the core truths, and allow clarity to emerge. This structured mental process reduces cognitive clutter, organizes your thoughts, and helps the brain release tension. In this state of clarity, your mind naturally shifts toward calmness, preparing the way for deep, restorative sleep. Hanlon's razor states, "Never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by ignorance or error." In other words, when interpreting someone's behavior, it is more rational to assume mistakes, misunderstandings, or lack of knowledge rather than intentional harm. From a psychological perspective, Hanlon's razor is closely tied to how the human brain interprets the intentions of others. Humans are naturally prone to the hostile attribution bias, the tendency to assume others act with negative intentions, especially under stress. 4. Example: if someone cuts you off in traffic, the instinctive reaction may be, "They did this to provoke me." Hanlon's razor reframes it. "Perhaps they simply did not see me, or they are distracted, or in a rush." Cognitive science shows that this reframing reduces emotional reactivity. When we interpret events as malicious, the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system, activates strongly, leading to anger or defensiveness. But when we reinterpret behavior as error rather than malice, activation shifts toward the prefrontal cortex, enabling more rational, regulated responses. This helps maintain emotional stability and reduces unnecessary conflict. In social psychology, Hanlon's razor connects to the fundamental attribution error, the tendency to overestimate the role of personal traits like malice or selfishness and underestimate situational factors like stress, fatigue, or lack of information. By applying Hanlon's razor, individuals counteract this bias, leading to more empathy and healthier interpersonal relationships. Practically, Hanlon's razor can be instant. If a colleague forgets to reply to your email, first-order thinking might suggest disrespect or hostility. Hanlon's razor prompts a second look. Perhaps they are overwhelmed, distracted, or genuinely forgot. This perspective prevents unnecessary tension and fosters cooperative solutions. Behaviorally, adopting Hanlon's razor trains the brain to pause before reacting. This pause reduces stress hormones like cortisol, lowers heart rate, and promotes more measured decision-making. Over time, this habit builds resilience, emotional intelligence, and psychological. You internalize this principle. You can reflect on your own recent experiences. How many times did frustration come from assuming malice where none existed? Notice how reframing events as errors or misunderstandings lightens the emotional burden. This shift quiets internal tension, organizes thought patterns, and prepares the mind to relax. With each reframed thought, stress decreases, calm increases, and your brain naturally prepares for deep, restorative sleep. This principle originates from the work of Alfred Korzybski in general semantics. It emphasizes that our mental representations of reality, the map, are not the same as reality itself, the territory. In other words, the concepts, beliefs, or models we carry in our minds are simplifications, not perfect reflections of the world. From a psychological perspective, the brain constructs maps through perception, memory, and language. When you see an object, hear a sound, or recall a past event, your nervous system does not reproduce reality directly. Instead, It encodes fragments, filters them through biases and prior knowledge, and then reconstructs an interpretation. Neuroscience shows that this process occurs in the visual cortex, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal regions. These areas collaborate to form an internal map of what is happening, but always in a compressed and imperfect form. For example, think of a city map. It highlights streets, landmarks, and routes, but omits countless details, textures of buildings, individual sounds, the emotions of people walking by. Similarly, your mental models highlight certain elements of reality while ignoring others. This simplification is necessary for survival because the brain has limited processing capacity. But problems arise when we mistake the map for the territory, when we treat our assumptions or beliefs as if they were the full, objective reality. Cognitive psychology links this to schema theory, the frameworks we build to understand the world. Schemas help us navigate quickly but can distort perception. For instance, if you carry a negative schema about a colleague, every action they take may seem hostile, even when it is neutral. Your map shapes your interpretation more than the territory itself. This principle also connects to confirmation bias, our tendency to seek evidence that fits our mental map while ignoring data that contradicts it. By remembering that the map is not the territory, we remain open to updating our models when new evidence arises. In scientific reasoning, this humility is crucial. A theory is only a map, never the territory itself. Practically, applying this principle encourages intellectual flexibility. When confronted with disagreement, instead of assuming they are wrong, we can reflect. Perhaps their map of the territory is different from mine. What details might their perspective include that mine does not? This fosters empathy, reduces conflict, and supports deeper understanding. Psychologically, internalizing this principle reduces stress. Many anxieties come from clinging to rigid maps, predictions of failure, exaggerated fears, ourselves that these are mental models, not absolute truths. The mind loosens its grip. This loosening calms the nervous system, reduces overactivation of the amygdala, and supports a state of restful awareness. As you reflect now, notice your own maps, the beliefs and assumptions you carry about the world, about others, and about yourself. Recognize that they are not the territory. They are approximations, tools, simplifications. This recognition clears mental space, reduces. With this clarity, the brain rests, the body releases tension, and sleep becomes a natural next step. At its core, relativity teaches us that perception, judgment, and value are not absolute. They depend on context, comparison, and perspective. In physics, Einstein's theory of relativity revolutionized our understanding of time and space, showing that measurements of speed, distance, and even time itself vary depending on the observer's frame of reference. Psychologically, the same principle applies. How we evaluate events, people, or ourselves depends heavily on what we compare them to. From a cognitive psychology perspective, relativity is deeply tied to contrast effects and reference points. Human judgment rarely operates in isolation. For example, if you receive a job offer of $50,000, it may feel disappointing if your peers earn $70,000, but exciting if you expected $40,000. The absolute number has not changed. The experience is shaped by relativity. This principle also explains why humans often misjudge satisfaction and success. Behavioral economics highlights the hedonic treadmill. Once we adapt to a certain level of wealth, status, or comfort, we reach our comparison point and no longer feel satisfied. Relativity ensures that happiness depends less on what we have and more on how it compares to others or to our expectations. Neurologically, relativity manifests in the brain's reward circuits, particularly the striatum and dopaminergic pathways. Studies show that dopamine release is not tied to absolute rewards, but to relative changes, whether outcomes are better or worse than expected. This explains why a small victory can feel euphoric if unexpected, while a large gain may feel flat if anticipated. In social psychology, relativity shapes perception of fairness and justice. Experiments reveal that individuals often prefer lower absolute rewards if it means they are treated equally, rather than higher rewards that create inequality. Again, what matters is not the absolute territory, but the relative map we construct. Practically, relativity can both distort and enlighten our thinking. It distorts when we fall into constant comparison, measuring ourselves against unrealistic standards, leading to stress and doubt. It enlightens when we recognize its presence. By consciously adjusting our reference points, we can reframe experiences. For example, gratitude practices re-anchor attention to what we already have, shifting relativity in a positive direction and increasing well-being. Psychologically, internalizing relativity encourages humility and reduces rigidity. It reminds us that perspectives differ. What feels urgent to one person may seem trivial to another, depending on context. This awareness softens judgment, builds empathy, and allows more flexible, compassionate responses. As you contemplate relativity, you might notice how many of your daily emotions are guided not by absolutes, but by comparisons between past and present, self and others, expectations and reality. By recognizing this, you can release unnecessary tension, realizing that many pressures are simply artifacts of shifting reference points. That realization calms the nervous system, quiets mental noise, and leaves you with a more balanced, restful state of mind. In this calmness, the brain is no longer chasing comparisons. It settles, breath slows, and sleep becomes effortless.